Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and here's another edition of Just Thinking. Today, it's our quarterly update from State Representative James Arena-DeRosa. We can count on our calendars when the quarter of the year passes. Here we are. I can't believe 3 months has gone since we last chatted. But anyway, welcome, James. Glad to see you.
Thanks, Mary. Great to be with you, as always. Happy to be here.
How are you?
I'm doing okay. We'll see. Ask me in the next year or two. But we're just going to keep plugging forward and do the best we can and represent the communities here. And we'll see what happens. So, yeah.
Good. So I want to kick off with the auditor question that was on the ballot and was overwhelmingly supported by the Commonwealth voters.
Sure.
And so now it's sitting in the hands of the state legislature, and we hear some rumblings about, well, we don't like this or we might not like that. The whole point of this is to create more transparency for voters.
Sure.
And one of the things that has been a real bug in my bonnet is that local officials can do nothing without being open and transparent. You can't have two members of the select board together having a chit-chat without somebody going whoopee because you didn't post the meeting. So the fact that under cover of the Golden Dome, so much business takes place in the dark. So what's the reaction at the state legislature?
So first of all, clearly, with that vote, people want to see more transparency. And there are a lot of things that I support that I think are really important. To your point, I was shocked going from being a local volunteer official here in the town of Holliston and then a federal appointee. And the regulations and restrictions I was under, for good reason, around open meeting and public records law, you get to the State House and it's like, oh, we don't have to do all those things. And I was really surprised. And I agree. I think there needs to be better alignment between, maybe we're too focused on the local. Maybe we need to loosen up a little bit so they can do their work. Maybe we need to be a little more restrictive on the state. I just think there needs to be alignment between the state, the local, and federal around how we treat public records. By the way, it's not just the legislature. The governor's also often is also not subject to many of the laws that you would think they would be. And sadly, Massachusetts is currently ranked up there with Alabama and Mississippi for being among the least transparent states in the country. Here we are, the creators of democracy, and proud of who we are. So there is work to be done. Now, you want to talk a little about question one? Sure. So there's different parts to it. On the financial audit side, under the past rules, the legislature hired its own auditor who then reviewed and audited. Well, that passed. We have now ceded that authority to the auditor. She will hire, vet, review who does the financial audit, and our understanding, it's going to be a public audit. It will be available to everybody. I don't have no problem with that. I think it's fine. And it's interesting because there was an op-ed about whether or not it was going to be public. We've been told by our Rules Committee it is public. Our speaker has said that we will obey the law. So that's just the premise to all of this. Now, there are some issues around whether or not parts of question one violate the separation of powers. We'll let the Attorney General and the courts decide that. We'll see. I think there's an overreach in a few places. For example, the auditor wanted to review how committee heads are selected. Well, I'm a democratically elected member of the legislature that have to stand up and vote for speaker, and then the speaker gets to decide the chairs. It's an open process. I don't think she would want us reviewing how she hires her division heads. I mean, that's
right.
So there were some things that didn't make sense. I think the things that people most want actually aren't in question one that we have to deal with. Things that are considered public record. What you said about what's a public meeting, I think we've got to do better. There are several things. I support publishing of our committee votes. I support public markups. Congress does that. We do. Finance Committee here in town, all that stuff is public and open. I don't know why that's not more open. And I think you can do it in a way that doesn't impinge on, yes, there's all that ongoing negotiations, discussions, go back and forth, the conference committee. Some of that has to happen so that people can get their work done. But I think we could be much more open. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the time ahead. But I think we have to do better. And I think also we have to kind of approach it that we're all in this together rather than one branch kind of doing their own thing and being worried about, well, those guys are going to be more open or less open. So I think you got to get the governor's office meeting with us and the Senate and see where we can do some things. So I think people want more transparency. And I'm still fairly new to the legislature, going into my second term. I will voice my perspective on these things. We'll see what plays out. But I'm also going to look at ways, well, how can I be more transparent? Just in general, I'm always happy to share what I'm doing, what I'm working on. It is interesting, though, to your very point, sometimes I want to meet with local officials about something that's pertinent that's going on at the state level. And they'll say, that's great, but we have to wait 2 weeks, we have to post, we have to, and I'm like, wow, and it's odd that I was under more restrictions as a local official than I am as a state official, so a lot of work to be done on it, and we'll see how it plays out in the courts, too.
Continuing with question one, in my memory, and I worked in there, it's a long time ago now, it seems to me that there used to be more openness than there is today.
Yeah.
Where, votes were all recorded. We knew about committee assignments ahead of time. It just seemed, and I even remember bills being marked up and sent around.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Something happened in the meantime. I don't think this is all old original kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But what about the votes? I mean, do you people actually take roll call votes anymore?
Well, a lot of work has gotten put into omnibus bills. So we do on the larger, bigger bills. And it's interesting. I actually think our less transparency has hurt our reputation. I think we've actually got more done than people realize, and partly because we don't talk about it, we're not open about it, we don't say, I mean, there were some major bills we can maybe get to if we have time that we passed, but I think because of the way some things happened, people get frustrated, and I just wish we were a little more open about it. Not every single detail. You've got to leave some space for negotiation that happens in government when you're trying to get stuff done, but I think along the way we could be more. No one has explained to me yet why our committee votes aren't public. We're polled by the chair, and we're asked to vote. It is interesting, and I've talked, I'm not saying anything I haven't said to my chairs and stuff. I am surprised. We have public hearings, and people come. And by the way, a good thing now that people can testify remotely, so that people used to have to spend the whole day to be able to share their perspective. So that's a good thing. I mean, it's a really good thing that people can do that. And we can ask questions. But what doesn't happen is the follow-up. Most committees don't then have a collective gathering. Well, what do you think about this? And my chairs are wonderful. If I have a question for staff, how does this work? What happens? But what I've said to a couple of them is, I have always benefited from agencies and organizations that I've run. I don't just want to have, here's my opinion, what do you think? It's, what does Mary think? What does Bruce think? You gain by listening to others' questions, perspectives. Maybe you come up with a stronger long-term plan. So, and I don't know where the resistance is to that. Maybe there's not. I know that COVID threw everything upside down, because one chair said to me, we used to do a lot more of that, and then we had to kind of change everything. I said, well, maybe it's worth looking at some of that again, because it seems to me it would help us all. And I don't think it undercuts leadership's role and power. I mean, there's still a system where they're in control. So, we'll see. Yeah, I've heard some of that. The other thing that's interesting, and again, maybe it was a budget issue, almost every legislature in the country has a legislative research bureau that's a nonpartisan group, small group that helps all legislators, regardless of their party. We used to have that. We don't anymore. And people kind of across the political spectrum are saying, why don't we do that? I think we should do that. I don't have a problem with that. Having another pair of hands, eyes, and ears to help look at things in a nonpartisan way, I think it could help all of us. So, yeah, but definitely some work to be done.
A lot.
Yeah.
So, how about the MBTA? Is it really on the agenda for the legislature?
We put significant amounts of money in. First of all, I don't know if you know this, but I like public transportation when it works. I take the T to Boston. I drive to Ashland and take the T. I do my emails. I get my walking in up to Beacon Hill and back. I think I'd like to see more of us do that. But we as a state, as a Commonwealth, let the T slide for years and years and years and years. I think this new group that's in control is doing well so far. I mean, in 2023, when Eng came in as head of the MBTA, I think almost a third of the tracks were on slow zones because of all the problems. I think by early calendar year or the end of this year, they will have 100% complete, no more slow zones. And I'll tell you, when the slow zones were, anybody that tried to get around the city, it was horrendous, some of that stuff. We did put in free fares to the MWRTA, the local transportation, which is good. But there's still a huge budget gap. I mean, it was neglected for so long.
Yep.
I think there's more work to be done, and I think balancing. I mean, I know people want to keep expanding, and that's not the worst thing in the world if you've got enough ridership and and we have a different workforce now. I mean, and I don't know how that measures, although it's interesting, you're getting more companies saying that they want their team back at work 4 days or 5 days. That may drive some of the numbers on transportation. I think we're approaching pre-COVID era for participation in the T, but it's still struggles, and it's frustrating when it doesn't work, and I understand people get upset. I mean, you should be able to get across the city easily, and sometimes it can take an hour and a half, 2 hours just to get a few miles.
It's easier to walk.
Well, no, sometimes, exactly.
I literally never took the T.
Yeah.
I walked that city over and over again, but I never took the T because I was faster.
When it works, it's great, but certainly has some challenges. But a lot of discussion about it. I mean, a huge bond bill. I mean, a lot of money has gone into it, so hopefully we'll get some results from it downstream. We'll see.
One of the things that might be of concern is that as we have a new administration going in Washington, and there's a real tug of war between, let's face it, Massachusetts' vision and Washington's vision, funding may get altered.
We're going to have to watch it closely. We're hearing a lot. We don't know yet exactly what that looks like. I'm worried about some of the big ticket items under the infrastructure bill that was passed, and that hopefully they're not going to go after that money, that we're going to get money that was promised to it, because people are planning, doing surveys, there's a lot of work that's gone into that. I'm a little less worried on public health and education, because we as a state, both locally at the state level, most of that funding comes from here. And it's interesting when they talk about the Republicans want to zero out the Department of Education.
It's nothing.
Well,
it's a closet.
That's one. And the other thing is the money goes to the poor red states. If you look at the money outflows from us to the poor red states, so I'm like, well, okay, if that's what you want to do, sometimes people and there's other things. I used to do a lot of international work, and Musk, one of his big things is let's go after these expensive, inefficient weapon systems. I'm like, wait till the contractors talk to you on that one. We'll see if they're talking about that in a year or two, and where the big money is in the budget. And meanwhile, are we taking care of our veterans? Which typically that's a challenge that we need to be more supportive of. So but to be determined. I mean, I think what is different is that this team that they're putting together is determined to look at those things. So I think we're going to hear a lot about it. Congress is going to have to agree to much of it, not all of it, depending whether it falls in the executive branch.
And there's going to be a lot of fallout for every action's going to have an equal and opposite reaction. And,
And on some issues, we may have to play defense. We may have to protect our residents. And, life wasn't that different in 16 to 20 for people in Massachusetts. I mean, we had to do some things. So it'll we'll see how it. That will be an ongoing discussion, I think, as this administration gets in place, and where's the Senate? Where's the Senate on the advising consent with some of the nominees? I mean, we'll see.
Well, I think that there's another issue for us in the Northeast. Right now, everything, movement has been to the south. As climate change continues to change us, as the who knows what's going to happen, okay? But some of that may start to change. We may start to see fewer people leave or more people come. That should be what we hope for, because the bottom line is, as if they continue to push things back to the state, we need a broader base to be able to pay for things.
Yeah.
And I have no objection to having the state have control. I really don't. I think probably one of the worst things that Reagan ever did was to eliminate federal revenue sharing, and that was in '84 or something, where you just got a chunk of money for the chunks of money that you sent to the feds, and then you did it, That to me makes a whole lot of sense, because a lot of money goes from here to there and never comes back.
Let the locals make the decision on
and
how
let
it
us
can
make
be
the
best
decisions.
invested. No,
That's
I've always
fine.
been all my work. Oxygen,
that's
Peace Corps, far more. You trust your local. I'm a big believer in local government.
Bring it back as low and close to home as you can.
Yeah.
That means that they need to send checks.
And it's going to be interesting, back to what will change. This new administration is talking about going after immigrants, and I hope they parse the difference between people that are here legally, that have been accepted legally in the country. I mean, we're thousands of jobs short right now, and the national home builders are worried. It's like, well, if you're going to take out people that are here legally and push them out, we're not going to have enough workers. And I still think that, as a Democrat, we mismanaged the narrative on immigration.
Yeah.
And I kept saying all along to people, look, I don't want people in cages. I don't want mothers separated from babies. There was some nasty stuff that went on under the early Trump administration. But then, and I said this to Jim McGovern the other day, he wants to build a wall. Let him build a wall. If they think it's going to help, we have to parse border security from how we treat people. Two different things. We kind of let it get commingled, and I think it hurt us as people viewed us. The other thing is, you know, a lot of the people that are here, and this is frustrating to a lot of people with the current migrant situation, many of them go through a process of asylum review. They have to be reviewed. Is there a problem in your country? Are you going to be they let them in the country? And I've said this to people, and I'll say the same thing to the Trump people. I said it to the Biden people. How come at the point of entry we don't then say, and welcome to the United States, here's your work permit. So no matter where you go, you can work and be part of a community and support. So we're 300,000 jobs short in Massachusetts. We have all these people coming in, but they can't work because there's a backlog in the work. The two branches of the federal agent government that deal with these things don't talk to each other. So that stuff's got to be cleared up along the way. So I think on some of those narrative issues we could do a lot better, but we'll see what happens. Yeah.
The greatest thing is how difficult it is to get agencies to talk to one another. And it's true in Massachusetts. It's true in Massachusetts. We can't pretend it isn't, but at any rate.
It's cliche about stovepipes and isolation, but it's also really true, which is unfortunate. So.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is sort of a personal grudge a little bit, and that is the House leadership. And I could say the Senate leadership, and I'm sorry. But leadership wherever it is, in Massachusetts or Washington, so many times they control everything, the flow of what's coming and so forth, so that really those are the people that are controlling the outcomes, but I can't elect or unelect them. You know what I mean? As leaders, I can unelect them as, you know, if you were a leader in leadership, I could unelect you. But that doesn't change the structure, the leadership structure. Is that just so solidly entrenched that there isn't a way in hell to change it?
I'm heading into my second term, so I'm still learning about the culture. And I've asked some old timers, like, how long did it take you to learn the culture? I'm like, well, I was here for 15 years, and I'm still, you know. Some of it's entrenched. I think some of it, if they were smart, if we were smart, stepping back and saying, okay, we had COVID, the first Trump presidency, 62F, budget check. A lot went on the last 5 years. I wish we could step back and say, you know, we really need to think through this. There are a lot of things that we accomplished that I think get suffocated because of the way it happened. And I think if we were more transparent about it, people would have a little more respect and be a little more supportive. I think sometimes it's almost too insular to a fault, and I think it undercuts how people view us. I don't know all the ins and outs, so I can't speak to, well, this is what needs to happen. But you know, whether it's the housing bill that passed, we did something on the big bill on the environment, investments in life sciences, which is huge for the future of Massachusetts. There was some landmark legislation that we passed that the governor signed, and I think had we been maybe a little more transparent along the way, there'd be more appreciation for what was accomplished. But because I think of the frustration in between, and then maybe we need, and it's getting looked at, maybe this July 31st deadline's artificial. Maybe we need to work more. Maybe we need to be there more at the State House in this complex era of government, right? And maybe it's going to take more time. So there's a lot going on at the same time. We'll hopefully keep talking as I stay in the legislature, and we can revisit this from time to time on whether there's any progress. But I think we need to do more, but I also think we need to be more open about the way we do it, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
I remember when Representative Arena-DeRosa ran here in 1972, he was one of the first candidates that was running on the idea of having a full-time legislature. So that you would be paid for a full-time salary, so that you would be there, so that you would be doing this job year-round. And yet, you know, now the jokes about your 5-month summer vacations and this, that, and the other thing are
not
like,
me.
Oh boy,
not
legislators.
Me. And I would never criticize because everyone's in different places. But this is all I do. I do this full time. Now, because of the salary structure, I had opportunities, and I loved who we had represent us. So I'm not saying anything against them. But I couldn't even think about running because we don't pay them as full time. I always do my New York. You know, I had both New York and Vermont when I ran U.S. State Peace Corps. Vermont, they meet for a few weeks. They pay them a stipend. You go have your real life. New York, they pay them $125,000, but like no outside income, no outside jobs. Maybe you can teach or a course or a few stipends. Being Massachusetts, we're kind of in between. Well, you know, we'll pay you $70,000 and give you some expenses, but you can do what you. So you get this mix of people in the legislature. We don't. I wish we had more middle income people with families trying to figure out how to make their mortgages work. We don't have many people like that.
Can't.
Because they can't make the numbers work, and I'm not sure that's good for society. You want your legislature to reflect the population as best you can. I mean, obviously you're going to get a mix, but yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. But I am full time, and
well, and I know a lot of the legislators are full time. When I speak full time, I'm talking about the fact that the sessions are so limited, that the number of opportunities for real fruitful debate, real conversation, or even for media to have access. I mean, it used to be we knew a lot more because you met a lot more, and the media was in the room, and then you'd see it.
Yeah.
You know, now if you're not meeting, how does the media even know what's going on?
And we have a completely changed structure of how the media is set up. When I was younger and at the State House, at the Secretary of State's office, the center, the media center was buzzing all the time.
Yeah,
I walked by there. There's a couple of people there hanging out, and they're great people, and we talk once in a while. But it's
the dynamic is so different.
Oh, it's so different.
Well, that's because the whole media picture is different.
Yeah.
But all right, so let's do an update on anything local. What's happening?
So, you know, it's interesting. One of the things that I hope to work on in the coming years is, you know, Holliston just had its 300th, Sherburne its 350th. Those lines were drawn 300 years ago. Yeah. Why isn't there more regional cooperation? And we see pieces of it with responding, first responding 911, some shared staffing, but I'd like to explore that more. I'm thinking about putting in an earmark to look at, you know, and let me just preface this by saying I believe that every child should get what it needs for education, and I support sped ed, but I think the state puts too much of the onus on local towns, and I don't know why there's not more cooperation among towns and also more support from the state. So we're going to set up, we're discussing, and I want to, only if the towns want to do it, some kind of regional dialogue. Can we share expertise? Can we think about, you know, parents want to have their kids as close to home as possible, and in California, which has pretty good school systems, I think, they only put 1% of their kids, sped ed kids, have to go out of district. We're closer to 5%. So you have all this like shipping in and out because we have small towns. Big cities are able to accommodate it because they're big enough to kind of shift on where they have the expertise. I'd like us to look at more of those things in the coming years. I'm certainly worried about food security. I think the numbers are startling now. You know, we made real progress, and now we kind of fell behind. I want to protect our farmers. I mean, you know, I'm worried about PFAS in the environment, but we don't want to go so far like in Maine where they had to shut down all the farms and now they're not growing some of their own food. Meanwhile, we get food on the docks, and who's looking at what's in that? And so
we know that's not inspected quite like you think.
Right. So there's balance in there someplace. Some of those things. You know, and it's interesting for me, some of the bigger needs are multi-million-dollar needs that I'm happy to be part of and be supportive and work with members of Congress. Some of the smaller earmarks where I have some control, I'm talking more with the local environmental groups, local art groups. What can we do at a more local level to support what we're doing here in these communities? So we have some of those things in the pipeline. I'll probably have more details for that when we meet in the spring. But those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to. I mean, one of the things that I worry about, you know, is affordability, and of course it runs through so many different issues. The housing for young people, the housing for seniors, all this push for more housing, MBTA Act, all that stuff. I wish there was more attention on why didn't we do some set-asides for seniors, veterans, first responders, town employees, young first-time buyers. None of that was in there, and to me, those are the groups that are struggling often with being able to afford to live in these communities, and so hopefully around that. But related to affordability for young people, a lot of discussion about student debt. College debts are so high, and debt relief. And I talked a little with Senator Warren about this. I'm like, you know, yeah, you're doing all this stuff on debt relief. I'm not against the concept. I said, you're not asking for anything in return. You know, and being a child of the 60s and John F. Kennedy and what are we all doing to help the country? You know, why aren't we incentivizing debt relief? So the kids who do Peace Corps or AmeriCorps or Commonwealth Corps and then come back and work in their local community or for a nonprofit or for the government, you know, why don't we start with that small subset and give them something for debt relief? So that's one that I'm going to be working on. It'll take years to get there, but we'll see what happens. But those are some of the things, you know, and I was pleased. It's funny, when I first ran, I think I said this to you already, but people said if you could do one piece of legislation, what would it be? And it would be some states have universal school meals, and we passed that this session. Really proud of that. I mean, a really great thing for us here in Massachusetts. It's going to help all kids, regardless of their income level. Any parent with a kid is going to save $1,200 a child now, so I mean, that's a good thing too. And So some progress along the way, but we'll see. But I'd love to help foster more collaboration and see what we can do about rising costs. And there's just some of the rules that are put in place by the state. You know, you were in town government. Towns are bound. They can only raise their by 2.5%, right? They can't without going to for an override. And yet, with impunity, the state can say, "Oh, we're going to charge 14% more to towns for their sped ed students that they send out of district."
Yep.
Well, that's not fair. No. I'd like to limit that to 2.5%.
Yep.
I'm not saying they shouldn't raise it, but then the state can do the difference,
yep.
right? In other words, there may be because the argument is, well, there's a reason for this. I'm like, that's fine. I'm not debating the reason for it, but don't push it on the local towns.
Yeah, how do you expect us to do it?
Well, exactly.
You know, with all of the resources that we have, or the
Oh, it's
limited
just-
resources.
Yeah, so we'll see. And I still, for the longer term, there's no small town caucus. So I wish there was more.
There used to
but
be.
There used to be, and I think there should be more binding together of the small towns. We have a lot of common interests, and we don't. You know, there's all these caucuses for interest, either interest groups, identity groups, or special issues, but not the small towns. And so I'd like to do a little more on that one too. So to be determined, but we'll see. We'll get there.
All right. All right. Well, that's all wonderful information. Always glad to know what's going on the inside, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway.
And if I could just, it's great to be with you. Thank you, Mary. And anytime anybody needs anything from government, please, they'll put the phone number and email on the screen. Please be in touch with my office.
Thank you. And we'll see you in the spring.
Absolutely.
In the
Thank you, Mary.
meantime, have happy holidays. Thanks, folks, and that's it. It's a wrap. We will talk to Representative James Arena-DeRosa come next March. Oh, and it'll be spring. Okay, thanks. Goodbye.